dividing in our sort of silos, trying to break out of those narrow margins. But yeah, I think that's it. I'll be posting through in the chat throughout the evening any necessary information, background information, things like that. Aaliyah is here, so thank you. And Brandon Janice will be leading the conversation. You can feel free to direct any questions to Brandon. We do ask if you have questions for our guest that, you can just turn off, unmute yourself and ask your question. You don't have to put them all in the chat, although if that's what you want to do, by all means, you can do that. But we do encourage you to engage Aaliyah directly. With that said, I think I've talked enough for one evening. Brandon, want to lead it from here?
Of course. Thank you for that, Ron. That was lovely. I'm Brandon Janice. I'll be facilitating the evening tonight. So just briefly, some quick housekeeping things. If you have a comment or praise for the book, if you don't mind, just because we are expecting a full house tonight, let's reserve the chat for comments, concerns, and praise for the book. Please add those to the chat as often as you like throughout the night. And let's reserve the stage, the virtual stage we have here, for questions. So if you have a comment or some praise, please pop it in the chat. If you have a question, well, please reserve those for the stage, right? The proverbial stage we have here. Just because there's a nice number of y'all on tonight, if you don't mind, if you do want to ask a question or two or five, just when you're ready, use the raised hand feature. So we can make sure we get to everyone's questions for Aaliyah. And that's really it as far as housekeeping is concerned. So let's start, shall we? I'll go ahead and ask the first question. And then after that, after Aaliyah answers, I'll open the stage up to all of y'all to use the raised hand feature and ask a question. But please do utilize the chat for your comments and praise as well. So let's start off. Aaliyah, thank you so much for joining us. And, we've been reading this book for the past 3 weeks now. We've been reading these stories for the past 3 weeks, and they've sparked so many great conversations, not just about religion, but about humanity as a whole. I've said from the first book club that even though these stories are centered in the Black Muslim community, the themes really are universal. It's really about the human experience. So I was wondering if you could start us off by talking about some of your motivations to start writing and curating this collection.
I'm very happy to answer. Well, good evening, first of all. And thank you so much to Book One Bronx for choosing Temple Folk and inviting me to be in your company tonight. I'm incredibly honored. What made me essentially want to curate this collection? I think I just wanted to see my experience in literature. I never read a book about Black Muslims, and in my explorations of literature, I had seen suggestions of the Black Muslim experience. Alice Walker's Everyday Use has a couple of, I don't know if you're familiar with that short story, but there are a couple of characters in that story who have these markers that you could say they're signifiers of Black Muslim identity. And so you're reading African American fiction and you're seeing these figures, but they're never filled out completely. And I just wanted to try my best, at least, to create a more complete literary Black Muslim. And so Temple Folk is my attempt to do that.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Who wants to start us off? Mr. Ron, go ahead.
Sure, I'll get started. So we were talking to your editor, Yadon Israel, he was gracious enough to join us at our previous book club over the weekend, and it was interesting that he had mentioned that when you presented this work to him, it wasn't a completed manuscript, and he just loved what you submitted, but then you had to go back and do the work of completing the manuscript. And the way he made it sound was like it wasn't even close to being finished, and you just put on your grind hat and you just made it through for, like, I don't know how long that period was, but can you speak about one, approaching him, but also the idea of now you have to complete this work, and what weight did that put on your shoulders?
Sure. Well, I love telling this story. I don't want to bore you if you've heard it before, but I went through a terrible personal trauma. And in the midst of my trauma, I was writing really extensively. My writing life was the one area of life where I felt I had some control and where I could, escape all of the things that were surrounding me and just immerse myself in something beautiful. And so my sister, who was really taking care of me in this really hard time of my life, she directed my attention to this tweet that Yadon had made saying that he was this newly hired editor at Simon & Schuster and he was looking for unagented manuscripts. And so my sister told me, you have to submit. And I looked at it and there were thousands of likes and responses. And I just thought to myself, are you kidding? He's never gonna see this. So my sister kept hounding me about it. And so just to, tell her that I had done it, I put together some of this work that I had been doing in this really challenging time of my life. It was 27,000 words. And I packaged it and I sent it. And just knew I was never going to hear from him again. A week later, I get a message, actually a notification on my phone that Yadon was following me on Instagram. And I thought, my Instagram is so boring. Like, why is he following me of the thousands of people who have probably responded to him? Why me? So I didn't think anything about it. And then I looked in my email 5 minutes later, and there was this message from him saying all of these glowing things about my writing. And then he said, I want to be your editor. And the next day we got on a Zoom, and that was the beginning. So after I'd signed the contract with Simon & Schuster, I had 1 year to finish the book. The contract said I had to submit a manuscript of 70,000 words. And as I stated already, I only had 27,000 words in my submission. So basically, I had to write 45,000 words in excellent words in 1 year's time. So I only submitted in essence a third of the book. After a year had gone by, I submitted 75,000 words. So I basically was able to do it in a year's time. And I think it's just because I really have a mind for fiction, you know. And I don't know, I just had this incredible focus that I was more than capable of getting it done. So that's the answer there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Great question. No one else has a question? Is this it?
Well, I can ask questions all night. One of my favorite stories was it's kind of sad, but the young woman who goes to Egypt and decides to stop wearing the hijab. And I don't know you, we've never met, but that felt personal. Was that in any way? I let me just say as a side, I know that writers are creative, and just because we think it identifies with the writer is just being creative. It's not necessarily a life story or taken from reality or anything like that. But that story just felt really personal to me. And I just wondered, and I have to look up the name of it. I'm sure you know it, of course, but
Called Egypt.
thank you. And I was just wondering, was that story personal to you, or was it just another short story?
No, sir, it's not personal at all. Imani is a completely made up person.
Okay.
I mean, I obviously don't cover anymore,
Mm-hmm.
so I can relate to her experience of coming to the decision that, you know, you still have these faith principles, but you don't necessarily feel that the outward symbol of the hijab or the head covering necessarily reflects the piety that you feel in your heart, that there are other ways of exemplifying your faith and the kind of person that you want to be in the world without signifying that in your manner of dress, because dress can be deceptive. You know, you can dress in a certain way and be a horrible person, you know, so there doesn't have to be this one-to-one correlation. And so she and I have come to similar conclusions about how to advance your faith in the world, but our stories are radically different. Like, I'm not, Imani is not in me, I'm not an Imani, and that the same applies for all of the stories in the book. They do not come from the life.
Thank you.
Adama?
Before Adama gives her question, I just want to say she's joining us from Paris tonight. So thank you so much for joining us over these past 4 or 5 weeks.
Welcome. Hello. So I love the book, and a lot of the stories in the book felt like it's nonfiction instead of fiction. And I've been trying to, you know, explain to a lot of people here in France, my family, friends, etc., especially about the story Woman in Niqab that Ron said. I think that it's also my favorite story in the book. I have like a lot of friends, relatives that had like some stories regarding the hijab and taking off the hijab, following traumas, following, I think, let's say that they had like some difficulties in their lives, things like that. And I think that it's a shame that I'm the one telling the stories. So my question is, are you going to translate it in French? Because I I'm telling to a lot of people about your book right now in France, and a lot of girls that have taken off the hijab, etc. And I really want them to read that book, because I think that it's really important, and it can, I mean, you can relate. And we've never had a book like that tells stories of Muslim women, a lot of about Muslim women. So my question is, are you going to translate your book in French?
I hope it gets translated. That's more of like a business question, and that sort of thing isn't really in my hands. It's really in the hands of my agency, and not even necessarily the publisher. They're trying to sell it in other markets, and it's having a hard time, but it's a young book, so hopefully one of these years it'll get published in a few languages.
Thank you for that, Adama. So there's a question in the chat from Fulake. She asked, the themes of colorism come up a lot in this book, and I wanted to know, was this intentional on your part? And was this an aspect of the temple you wanted to shed light on?
When I think of colorism in temple folk, the story that comes to mind first and foremost for me is blue. Olake, I wonder if there's another story that that you're thinking of. With that story in particular, my interest was really to highlight the ways that the Nation of Islam interrupted colorism within the Black community, the way that they gave us these tools to help relanguage the way that we conceive of Black beauty. Because I don't know about other Black cultural contexts around the world, but here in the United States, we had like the paper bag test, where you had to be a certain shade of brown in order to have access within certain elite Black spaces. And in recent years, people have gotten away with saying things like, it's equally hard to be a fair-skinned Black person as it is to be a darker-skinned Black person. And certainly there are challenges that we should not downplay associated with being fairer skinned and being Black, particularly related to just being taken seriously as somebody that's also shouldering the burden of Blackness in the world. That is a serious problem that fair-skinned Black people face. But in the wider world, I think it is clear that it is more challenging to be a darker skinned person in the world. And I just wanted to write a story where we could see that, and we could see this group sort of interrupt this pattern within the Black community and provide this woman a sense of her own beauty, And so that's how I try to address colorism. I'm trying to think of another story where it occurs.
I would say in New Mexico, like at the end with the woman, well, I think she was the target's wife, or maybe she was the target. There was definitely some colorism there.
Oh yeah, where she's passing.
Where she's passing.
Yeah, I just thought it was kind of an interesting idea. I thought, like, how would a person who's far away from the gaze of the nation, but who has this fair-skinned privilege, how would they behave when they're in a faraway place? Would you see this militancy, or would they morph into a different kind of person? And so, yeah, I can see how colorism would play into that conversation between her and the investigator.
Yeah, I mean, everything about her really, like even the way she was like trying to hide her son's hair, and like how she went to the pool like late or like after it had closed, like she had some issues. But there was also I think we had a debate about this in the other book club. Was the wife, got the name of the story, was the wife that breaks up the funeral white. I think it's Who's Down. Maybe it's Nika. Which one am
And
I?
that's Janaza.
Oh, that's Janaza.
It's never stated explicitly, but it's implied that she's white. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Ron definitely was like, no, she's white. And I was like, I don't know if she is. It doesn't say.
I mean, I only thought that because like you made the point of the blonde hair, which is always not always, but I mean a lot of Black women do wear their hair blonde. But anytime you just hear the term blonde, that's often synonymous with whiteness. But you could be, if you say it's a blonde, the person's a blonde. Yeah, that's what I think anyway.
yeah, I left it ambiguous. I mean, I can't tell you that she is because the story isn't written in a way that's very explicit, I think it's up to you. She is what your imagination wants her to be. But the idea that this man would abandon his wife of many years to be with someone who had who wasn't a reflection of the ideas that he would have promulgated, as captain in the nation. It's just, it kind of shows you how tenuous these ideas can be in our minds and how dependent they are on like our state of being, like we kind of want to be outside of the radical when things are better, it's not a comfortable place to be when you're always like frustrated and angry all the time. And how does that reflect, in the kind of choices that we make around the people that we associate with?
That's true.
Was the protagonist's wife in that story also white?
It's another one of those situations where it's up to you. There's some when Harold is asked by his old friend who he reunites with about his race, his wife's race, he doesn't answer. And so we can tell that there's this sense within Harold that if I told you, you would look down on me, you wouldn't think that I was a real brother, So
Well,
it's up to you what you think she is.
what do y'all think about that?
I have, oh,
That's Miss Stacy. Miss Stacy, do you want to chime in?
no, I was going to ask a question, but I'll wait until you receive a response to yours.
I was just wondering, like, what do y'all think about that? Not just Aaliyah, but any author or any artist that really leaves the work up to you to figure out what's going on in the story or what's going on the page. Or what do y'all think about that? Do you think like that's kind of cool and like, yeah, I'll decide what's going on in the story? Or do you kind of think like, well, if you don't know Aaliyah, who does? Like pretend she's not here.
Well, I think it creates an access point for the reader. And so, while I would shy away from, approaching work from that, in that way throughout the book, but there's certain, I believe that there are certain points in a book where you want for the reader to be able to access it through their own life experiences and to interpret what it is that the author is offering, not telling us, but offering us as an idea or something that, with which we can relate or not relate to the characters in the story. So I think it enriches, the experience, the literary experience.
I agree, Miss Stacy. Any other thoughts?
I was going to say that that's actually one of the things that I love about these stories is that they're so nuanced. And I think in our discussion, the different perspectives, and
Right.
so much of what you see in art also is based on your experiences and your level of consciousness, right? And I remember last week when we had, when we got together to talk about the book, we talked about Nika, that story. And boy, people had really strong opinions and ideas about that one and the character. So I think I love the fact that it's nuanced, that it's left open to interpretation. I think that's really the beauty of art.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. Because of the discussion that Brandon led and Ron also contributed greatly, as you know, as always happens in the community, everybody is sharing. I didn't finish the book as yet, but because of that discussion, I even got the book. So I want to give a big shout out to One Book, One Bronx. But I also want to say that's a great question, and your response, Ms. Balil, is reminding me of Toni Morrison's Recitative, which she has two protagonists, and we don't know which one is telling the story or the story is being told about. We don't know if she's Black or white. And each time you read it, you probably land on the opposite decision about whether the protagonist is Black or the protagonist is white, which just makes it so much richer. So that's how I'll end on what I'm feeling about the stories you're telling so far.
Thanks, Ms. Levon. Ms. Stacy, do you want to chime in with your question?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Brandon. Aaliyah, congratulations. Congratulations on the success of your book. And if you don't mind my saying, you make the ancestors proud. So thank you. My question is about the overarching theme. Is there one? Is there a through line, an overarching theme? And if so, what is it, or what are they? And how did you arrive at that decision to make that the theme, the takeaway for your readers?
Thank you so much for your question, Stacy. I started, when I realized that I had a collection on my hands, I started identifying some through lines. And one of the major impediments for me in imagining this world was that my initial notions of how I was going to build the world were really faulty for my purposes. I thought that I was going to create a world based on this framework that I had been presented growing up in a Black Muslim community, which was that we were reverts. And the revert is just another way of saying a convert to Islam. But within African American Muslim or Black Muslim spaces, there's another layer of meaning to that idea of the revert, in the sense that upwards of 30% of us were Muslim before we were captured in West Africa and brought to the quote unquote New World. We'd become Christianized. And then in the 20th century, we readopt Islam. And so it's like this circular kind of pattern that's being created. And I thought, I'm going to write a book informed by this idea. And it was completely faulty. It had too many holes and it was too cute. And then I started really interrogating that idea and asking myself, you know, is this a true reflection of how African American people are coming to Islam? And I realized that no, what felt truer to my imagination was this idea that we are encountering Islam in the present era as one point on a longer trajectory of African American engagement with these grand ontological ideas. And so it was just one point of progression on a much longer trajectory, so that Islam cannot be perceived as a culminating point within African American religious experience, that of course the generations will go on to find other answers and other ways of addressing, you know, their spiritual condition in this world. And that felt truer to me. And when I realized that, that was the through line. And if you notice in the stories, a lot of them end with an escape. It's like the stories are running into each other. And then in the end, you're in the stars, you know? It's just about getting free. It's about us finding our freedom.
Thank you. Yeah, I did pick up on that. And I think that we discussed that last week. Brandon had led a conversation about that, the thematic basis to your work. And that came up. I recall truth, that I'm gathering that, what you're saying is about that it's about finding one's truth and, moving in that direction. I did find, yeah, so I see what you're saying. Thank you. Yeah.
I just, that's reminding me that that's the evolution of the so-called three Abrahamic faiths, right? So that's paralleling it. And I love that you're framing it that way. Oh, I never thought about that before. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to write a book where it was clear that there are a lot of people who arrive at Islam and they find really satisfying answers. And there are other people, particularly the second and third generation, who are feeling like, how can I redefine this experience for myself? Maybe there's a way for me to continue to claim this as my faith, but to tailor it so that it's more suited to my needs. And then there are other people who just say, Islam isn't for me, religion isn't for me, and everybody, having the right to make that determination for themselves and to move on as they wish, so.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Hold on, Fulake. I'm gonna call you next. Ayor, do you want to chime in?
Sure, Aaliyah. Yeah, I love this book so much. I'm not done yet, but it's definitely, top 10. Obviously, I can relate to the stories a lot. I'm a Muslim. One of the themes that I'm working through while I read the book is, as a mother, how do you pass on, faith to your children? And what is that place of faith going to be in their lives? These stories feel very familiar. Having a grandmother that converted to Islam in like the 50s, I think she converted, where it didn't happen. She didn't come through Nation of Islam, but obviously considered a Black Muslim growing up, is something that's part of your culture. You understand that there is this group of Muslims that are part of it, even if you're not of Nation of Islam. So I can't remember my question. Okay, let me pose it as a question. So I guess my thought is, what were your thoughts around, again, this passing of faith onto your children? It seems like you really were working through that a lot. You had a lot of stories of mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, what that looks like in terms of passing your values down, passing your history down. It seems like a lot of the parents were really just trying to ensure that their kids were going to be okay in the next generation, whether that was financially, having these businesses that were allowed them to be financially okay, allowing them to go to Egypt. I mean, that story seems so out of the blue in terms of like, I couldn't even imagine someone letting their child go like to Egypt like back then, but it just was so magical to think that someone would let their child go with his family to another country like that. So just always trying to find better for their children. And I think that's a lot of what I've been taking from the book, whether it was in a positive way or whether it was in a negative way in some of the stories that you explore. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I would really like that.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Iore, am I saying your name correctly? I just think the parent-child relationship is just the perfect site for the interrogation of dogma, because that's typically how dogma is passed down And part of how we recycle our faith is just in wanting to please our parents by adopting the beliefs that they taught us. I certainly don't have any advice for how one should do that, not being a parent myself and not being somebody that's entirely persuaded that religious ideas have served me all that well in my life. I mean, there are ways that I'm certainly grateful to have had the formation that I've had in religious spaces, but a lot of my life has been about unlearning and interrogating and trying to see how various systems, including religious dogmas, have tried to confine the possibilities of my life as a Black woman living in the world. And I don't think that that's confined to religion. I mean, there are all kinds of experiences that we can have in life where we realize, like, okay, there's something about this that's trying to shape what my life can be so that I cannot determine for myself how I'm going to live in the world. And how do I break free of that? That's just a process of educating oneself. But I think there's a completely lovely and innocent way to introduce religion to your children. If it's something that's valuable to you, why not share that? I think religion can be a comfort and very aesthetically beautiful, and yeah. The parents in this book, though, I just think that they see Islam as a protection, particularly in a story like Woman in Niqab. The mother and aunt really want Imani to cover because they think that if she goes into the world as a woman that's covered, that she'll be afforded a certain kind of respect that other kinds of women aren't afforded. And then, in real life, you and I, all of us know that there is nothing protecting you, that we all are facing struggles, however we present ourselves. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you.
Great question, Iori. Yeah, Iori actually was one of the first readers to bring up the very deep relationship between families, especially parents, in these pages. And it's kind of interesting that you also say that a lot of these stories are about people escaping, at the end, people are escaping and usually escapism is not something we really couple with good parenting. It's actually the last thing you should probably do if you want to be a good parent is escape, right? This is why I think that this collection of stories is so interesting, because the characters are really revolting right there on the page in front of us, and we're like trying to keep it together. We're there with them, but for example, like in Candy for Hanif, like we tore that story up. We were it was half and half. Half of the people were like, hey, listen, he's safe with the temple, like he's safe with the handyman, he's gonna be all right, he's a 31-year-old man. And then the other half of the people were like, no, you can't just leave your kid and like get on a bus and go on the Greyhound to Miami. Like, just I don't care how old the guy is, you can't do it. So great question, because I think that this collection of stories is so much about family and commitment, but it's also about survival. And like Aaliyah mentioned, escapism. And what will you do for survival? Because no one's survival comes without sacrifice. So that's one of the big themes when we're talking about themes in pages for me. And if you don't want to raise your hand and ask a question, you're still more than welcome to use the chat. And I would invite everyone, since we're talking about themes right now, to just pop in some themes that really resonated with you or came up with you while we were reading these pages. You can pop them just right in the chat. Jasmine, do you want to chime in?
I could wait after the discussion on themes if that's better.
Oh no, you can go now. If you want to talk, if you
Okay.
want to mention a theme,
Yeah.
pop it in the chat.
Okay. So I was just thinking about how the next book in our book club sequence is James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. And that book was selected to be in conversation with your book, Temple Folk. And so I was wondering if you see Temple Folk being in conversation with other media to expand or create new channels for like specific conversations, like whether it's the themes that we're dropping in the chat or whatever it is, and like media being other books or even songs or films. So I'm even thinking about American fiction and how that expands the conversation on what kind of art and writing you can create as a Black person and expectations around that. So the question is just, what other media do you see your book being in conversation with?
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for that question. I hope that it can be in conversation with everything, because this experience, like all experiences, it touches everything. And it's never been done before, there's never been a work of literary fiction about this world. There's only been, academic kind of style of writing, journalistic nonfiction. These are the kinds of things that have been published about this experience. But yes, I do hope that it can be in conversation with a variety of media, because I hope that the book contributes something novel to the conversations that we have about African American religion, and particularly women in African American religious spaces. And it helps highlight the importance of the Muslim experience to the Black experience. It's when we often think about African American religiosity, I mean, the first image is, if you close your eyes and think of it, you see a church, when there's so much diversity among African American religious, people. And so yes, I hope it will be in conversation with lots of media.
Alicia, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll I don't know what happened to my, hold on, let me see what's going on with my video. Is it working? Yeah, it's working. Good evening. I actually like the theme of escapism a lot, coupled with the other themes about women and religion. But I liked escapism because I think that's a real human experience of wanting to get out of a situation that no longer serves you, or it feels toxic, or you want to reinvent yourself and start fresh. And it sometimes forces us to face our own hypocrisy in some respects, because sometimes when we escape, we have to return to the place that we left. So I definitely appreciated escapism in the varying essays, for sure. So I appreciate that, Aaliyah.
Fulake, did you have a question? Fulake will come back to us. Any other questions? Great themes in the chat. Keep popping them in.
Hi, this is Yari again. The story I struggled with the most was Janaza. Like, I don't know why it felt very confusing to me. I guess if you could talk about like what you were, I mean, I know you want us to interpret it on our own too, but I guess his thoughts around like what were you hoping we would get out of the story? I'll say it that way.
Well, I have to tell you, Janaza is one of my favorite stories. I think a lot of days it's my favorite story in the book. A lot of days it really is my favorite story in the book. And I love it because you got this man who's leaving his wife, essentially. That is what's happening. That is the story. Harold is leaving his wife. But the janaza is an excuse. It's an excuse. He just needed a reason to get out of Dodge. And so he goes to what he thinks is a janaza, which actually turns out to be the ghusl, the ritual washing of the body, and has this encounter with an old friend who is himself an ex-con, potentially escaped from prison. And so you've got these two men who are leading these kind of shady lives in dialogue with each other about their past as students in the University of Islam, which is the primary and secondary school in the Nation of Islam. That's really what I wanted people to take away from that story. Is like, you've got this man who feels like he's being deceived by this old friend. Should he still be in prison, or is he legitimately free? Or, you know, the truth, which is like, you yourself are on the lam. You are trying to get away from your wife. So that's what I hoped people would take away from that story.
Yeah, we definitely did. We talked about that a lot. Like, is he on the run? He's on the run. Like, you know, when he asks him, Harold like asks him at one point, like, oh, so where are you staying? And he's like, oh, you know, here, there, you know. He just kind of like, I don't know why you would take that risk. He must have really cared about that gentleman who died. But yeah, great story. But I totally can see where you're coming from too, Iori. Lots of, it's a short story, but lots of things to unpack there. Because at the end, when he throws his wedding ring off, that's when I realized he was leaving his wife. At the beginning, at first, I thought, oh, he saw this non-Black and non-Muslim woman make an incredibly embarrassing scene at the funeral. And he knew that he had a white wife at home. And it was like foreshadowing. He just didn't want that to happen to him. And at the end is when he realized, like, okay, I got to get out of here. And maybe it could be both, a little bit of both. But great story. Lots to unpack there. What do you
Yeah, thank you for. I think I kept getting stuck on why, like you said, like, why did they come back for this? Because it obviously sounded like the guy wasn't that great. I mean, it sounded like, this father figure that, like, I guess did some good things, but maybe the bad outweighed the good, you know. But it is what it is. So for them to even like sit there and like spend all that time going back and forth and all of the stories about him, I was like, what is going on? But yeah, it was a great story.
Aaliyah, I have another question. Was there a story that was particularly difficult for you to write, most emotionally challenging for you? If so, why?
Wow, emotionally challenging. Okay, what story was hardest to write emotionally? I think Due North maybe emotionally was the hardest to write, even though it was one of the fastest stories to write. It was the hardest emotionally because it took me a long time to figure out Takwa's dilemma. I had figured out so many other aspects of that story, but the narrator, like her central conflict, was not clear to me. And so when I realized that there was this huge hole in her story, like we don't know how love factors into her life. that's when I got it, and the whole story came together after I realized we need to figure out where love factors into her life. Yeah. So that was hard, but Janaza was technically the hardest story to write.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stacy. Any other questions? Adama put in the chat that she was unaware that polygamy was in Black American Muslim communities. And it's definitely in the stories. Actually, we kind of like had a bit of a debate about that because we were like, wait, is this, how are you a Black Muslim, but you don't know about polygamy? Because all of the women in the stories, correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, but a lot of the women in the story seem shocked and appalled that their man had another wife.
It happens, but it's not common. I think people assume that if you're Muslim, a Muslim confronting, questions of polygamy, that you're in a different cultural context. That it's perhaps more common for Arab Muslims to be confronted with polygamy. But yeah, there's significant numbers of African American Muslim spaces where this is a conversation. And when I talk to my girlfriends who are still like in the masjid, that's the conversation. A lot of them are thinking about second marriages after a first marriage didn't work out. And they're like, girl, I just don't want to be with a man that wants to take me as his second wife, so it's colloquial. It's something that's a very common conversation, even though a lot of women would say that's something they wouldn't tolerate, they wouldn't put up with it, so.
It's I think it's amazing how you in the book, when the first time I've seen like the subject of polygamy, well, coming from Senegal and also originally from Senegal. So coming from Senegal, I'm well aware about this practice. And it's funny how since we are young, we've seen polygamous like family, whether it is in France or in Senegal, I've seen it. And we've always told ourselves that never we will accept that kind of practice. Never. I will never accept to be a second wife or a first wife or things like that. And when I see right now some friends that are becoming second wives, I'm like, wow. And it's like today, how we were saying that the practice that our parents did, we will never accept that, and how today it's kind of changing. Like for example, Senegal, for the first time we have a president that has two wives, and everybody is praising him for that. And it's, from one side, I'm like, okay, it's kind of different from what we are saying, but from another side, I'm like, okay, we are just reclaiming who we are. Because the West want to impose us their culture, their way of doing things, etc. And for the first time in Senegal, we have a president that do not care about that and say, I'm going to, accept who I am. So I have like one question. I know you say that you leave us the imagination, but when we talked about women in niqab, I told within the chat when we spoke about that, maybe I think it was 2 weeks ago, I told them that the father of Imani took a second wife. That was my impression. The book did not say it, but for me it was like, I think he took a second wife. And that's why at the end Imani was kind of mad about all that, and also regarding the prostitute in niqab that she saw in Egypt. But yeah, that I really didn't know that, like, that was something within the African American Muslim community. So yeah.
Definitely in the African American Muslim community. Yeah. it's something that's actually very common.
Okay, thank you.
We got about 30 minutes left. I'm sorry, Ron, were you gonna ask a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up on the polygamy theme that in this story, Sister Rose, uh, when the husband takes a second wife, the first wife is like, I'm not gonna have it. And you know, she's seriously thinking of murder, you know, until she hears her baby. And I guess that kind of snaps her back into reality. But you know, just to follow up on what Adama's point is like, so like it's on one hand, that seems foreign to people in America, but on the other hand, women who enter into these, I'm going to call them a situation, they're not all happy in the situation, you know, and it just feels so the definition of toxic patriarchy, where a man would not care what his wife, his first wife, thinks, to the point where the first wife is willing to kill him. The tension in that household day to day must have been unbearable, let alone, you know, to live that way. And he finally gets the point and was like, number two, you gotta go. But it was interesting.
Well, I think like I mean Aaliyah was expressing a lot of that book, which makes it such a human book, is that there is the practice of Islam and then that's what humans do, right? So when you look at what actually should happen if you have a second wife, it's supposed to be equal, extremely equal. Like you cannot even take a second wife if your first wife doesn't agree to it. You have to be able to provide for them in equal measure in everything. So the amount of people that can actually even do that is so minuscule in the world because there's just so few people that have the ability to keep two full households, right? But then what do we have? We have this bastardness of this practice. And unfortunately, in the African American community, it gets really exaggerated in the point because again a lot of single mothers, right? So we have this situation unfortunately where a lot of single mothers find themselves drawn to Islam and maybe they found bumped into someone on the street like in the story, right? And this person is telling them that they're beautiful but you have to be a second wife. And so there's so many ways that people find themselves in these type of situations that are not necessarily healthy because the relationship was never going to be healthy anyway because it wasn't a balanced situation. So I think Aaliyah just does a great job. Like, I mean, yes, it definitely still happens. Go to Brooklyn. There's tons of polygamous families there. Go living like in housing projects in multiple places in the same apartment building. It definitely is still happening. But I think you did such a great job of capturing a story that isn't told at all. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yura. It's just so important to know that women are not just passively accepting these realities, that a woman can be pious, can try to live according to her faith and intervene in circumstances and say, I love God, but I don't accept this. I don't accept this. And so the challenge was just getting the balance right of not like maligning an entire faith, but really just showing how individual women can act on their own behalf, you know, and sort of claim themselves in the midst of some really unusual circumstances. Yeah, I'm just grateful that people like are seeing, because I never want to be perceived as someone that's maligning Islam. There are so many entities in this world that are doing that. And it's so much more about just showing how, as you said, you know, there's a faith, there's a tradition, and then there's what people do, you know, and that those can be separate sometimes.
How is your family and friends taking about the book? What are their thoughts around the book?
My family loved the book, which makes me really happy because I was concerned that because my family is very practicing, my father is an imam. And so, yeah, my family, I was worried that maybe they would look at the book and think that there was something in there, particularly a due north, that they wouldn't approve. But everybody's really embraced the book. I'm really happy to say that. Yeah, it's hard talking about LGBTQIA issues in Muslim spaces for obvious reasons, in the same ways that it can be hard to discuss those things in Christian spaces or in Jewish spaces, but I feel like the people that I was expecting to be the most critical have been the most embracing, which goes to show that we should be giving our communities a little bit more credit when it comes to discussing these issues. Yeah.
Are younger Muslims more accepting of LGBTQ issues, or is this just sort of universal throughout the religion?
I couldn't tell you, to be honest, but my sense is that yes. Yes, they are. And which is lovely because to me, people get that, faith is about personal piety, and it's not necessarily about imposing a set of dictates on anybody else. It's about personal piety. And I think it's a different conversation, however, when it comes to embracing queer Muslims. That seems like a frontier. But my experience has been one of increasing acceptance. There are a lot of, part of why I'm not really able to be a part of a Muslim community is because I have a lot of pain around the ways that these kinds of topics continue to be discussed in those spaces, and my spirit cannot withstand that. But again, like, I do think things are changing. Particularly when we see the ways that the LGBT community has rallied around Palestine, I think it's really opened a lot of hearts. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
I want to add something from what Aaliyah say about the LGBTQ community. I think that people think that because we are Muslim and what Islam say, we're going to be like against it, or have like extreme views on that. I would say that my experience with it is that part of my experience, whether it is in France or in Senegal, is that people don't say anything about them. I've been in Senegal and I've, seen people like LGBTQ community in Senegal has no issues with them. Religious people will talk. I will say that it's a lot of talk. People will speak, criticize, but other than that, they will be in their life, in their families. They will live their lives. And I can remember like a friend of my aunt. I was young and everybody knew that he was gay, and they had no issues. My family, who is like, we are really like practicing religious like Muslims, they had no issues of sending me I was 14 or 15 years old for the first time in the United States because I wanted to go to travel, and my family had no issue of sending me to him. and my aunt knew that he was gay. And I'm just saying that, yeah, it's a lot of, critiques. People talks a lot, but in fact, I believe that within at least the Senegalese communities, and I have like friends from Morocco, Algeria, Mali that tells me the same thing, that they are accepted.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We got about 20 minutes. Alicia, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had one question, another question about due north. That's the last one, right? That's the last essay. Because we were talking about LGBTQ plus, and it comes up in that essay, I was wondering in my mind if there was a connection between the father's experience, which is why he left, if that was connected to how he felt about his son being possibly queer, or if it was just the religion. Because in my head, I felt like both experiences connected to how stern he was about that.
When I was conceptualizing Due North, I didn't really read it that way. I think the father's hangups have to do with his own guilt
Okay.
around the way that he abandoned the church,
Yeah.
and the ways that he hides this guilt, and how the son doesn't know because he hasn't received the full story, the way the son triggers the father's guilt. And
Yeah.
so the father's anger toward the son is compounded. The
Okay.
anger toward the son that begins with his questioning of faith and this like burgeoning atheism in the son
Yes.
compounds with this presumption of gayness, and
Right.
that compounds with the son leaving.
Leaving.
Yeah, and I think all of these things really just draw out the father's guilt.
Yeah. Okay.
And it creates that explosive moment where there's
Yeah.
Mhm.
It does. Yeah, it wasn't clear only because of how you described when you go back and you start telling, and the father's story is being told by the aunt. Because the phrasing was, had their way with him, with Mike. So I was like, and there's sexual violence wrapped up in the lynching experience or what. So that's why I was like, whatever he saw was of course traumatizing, and then compounded by all the things that you just said. So I wasn't certain when I read it. Thank you for that.
I forgot that I wrote it that way. It's so funny how the author can forget.
Yeah.
But I don't want to frustrate anybody about the way that I'm talking about these stories. It could happen that there was some sexual violence, but I didn't see that. I just thought yeah.
Any other questions?
I just had a quick question about Sister Nora. That story really triggered me. Yeah, like we were on here like having a friendly light debate, like she said, for almost an hour about the way she abandoned her son. So that was my question. Why didn't you go the route that Sister Lunell had told her to put him in the home versus just leaving him? And then, I mean, I just kept thinking like he's probably so lost. Like he's like, when is mommy coming home? Because our thing was he's 31, but where is he mentally, So that was my thing with that one. So I was wondering why you went that route.
Because it wouldn't have been as good a story. Could you imagine me wrapping it up? So she goes to this thing, and then she sees the guy from the boat and is like, oh my gosh, my son's trying to kill me. And then Sister Nora goes back to the masjid, goes back to the temple, and she takes her son. I just think it's like more exciting if she does something really mean. Like, let's let her abandon him. That'll be a good story. It was really for dramatic effect.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we had such a great debate on here, because I don't think it was mean at all. I think that it is a sacrifice that comes with survival, new beginnings, right? New beginnings can't happen without a sacrifice. And
You know, it's so funny. More than half, I think 70% of the readers that I talk to are rooting for Sister Nora.
yeah, they should be.
They think she, they think she needed to leave.
Yeah.
And I think that's the worst personal thing. Personally, I think it's like the worst thing a person can do. I think, like, how could she? That's terrible.
Exactly. I'm like, and then the man had to go with his kid at 6 o'clock. Now he can't go, and his kids are home crying. Like,
Well,
But
I mean, this is it.
maybe when Sister Nora is giving $5 to the homeless gentleman, she's seeing her son. So maybe the brother doesn't take care of Hanif. Maybe Hanif gets abandoned to the streets.
that's worse.
Wasn't that guy like a scammer though? Like he wasn't really homeless or something? I don't know.
That
I feel like we
in
gotta-
her mind, she felt scammed.
Yeah. And she didn't know, like it was unclear to her and to the reader if Hanif, when he like pushed her in front of that bus, if that was like, first degree, if that was like flat out malicious felony. So it's like, it's either she had a choice to make, the story's about choices, right? And I think it can really behoove us to maybe make a lot of us, especially women, make some more selfish choices. She had taken care of him for 31 years, and it was either tack on another 31 and die like the other sister did, or find another way out. And I applaud her.
I think Hanif is younger than that. I think he's 21.
Oh, he's 21. Who said he was 20? I thought he was
Because
younger too.
he's 41. She's 40. So yeah, I think he's younger than that. But
But still,
Get better.
Ron said that doesn't make it better.
It's actually worse because now he's like a helpless child. Oh my goodness.
Althea can't take fiction. It's just fiction, Althea. There's no like 21-year-old man walking around without his mother.
it's just a story. It's all make believe.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I actually kind of wanted to ask a question about Candy for Eve, because to me, that story is about patriarchal forces. And I don't so much focus on why did she do that to Hanif? To me, it's more of her rebelling against temple life because she feels unappreciated, her along with the other sisters who do all this gendered labor for the temple. And she's the only one who's not bowled over by that night on the cruise. So was it your intention to kind of, because I know we talked about patriarchy in terms of another story that we talked about earlier, but was that your intention to kind of be like, this is a rebellion on her part against the kind of strictures that are placed on women in temple life, and that this woman's just fed up and she's not gonna put up with it anymore, and the unfortunate side effect is her son, who's in need, is going to be kind of discarded?
You're the first person to ever identify that to me. Yes. I think the story comes out of a frustration about the way that women's labor across race, across religious identity is typically undervalued in religious communities. So Black women, for instance, are the heartbeat of the Christian church, of the Black church. It's likewise, Black women make up significant numbers in Black Muslim masjids, spaces, temples, what have you. And we cannot become imams. So in a sense, we are constituents, but we don't have a voice in the way that men can have a voice in Muslim spaces. I'm saying that with several caveats, of course, but yes, like there's a huge gender issue here, and it's just compounded one thing on top of the next. Like the first blow is this man doesn't even know that the head chef is dead. And then Sister Nora's contending with this abuse that she's facing at the hands of her son. And then somebody comes in to try to ameliorate this feeling of being underappreciated with these tickets to this like third-rate dinner cruise. So you get offended, continually offended, and she just can't take it anymore. So yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Got about 10 minutes left.
Over the weekend, we were having a conversation, and someone felt that at the short story Nika, that the main character was being recruited through online dating. I think it was Anais who's here. She felt that the character was being recruited by the Albanian online boyfriend. Is that the case, or are we just reading too much into it?
Recruited into what?
Probably some
terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I don't think this guy is above board. I think there's some things to suggest that he's got some ulterior motives that don't just have to do with purely loving Kadira as her husband.
Wow. And Don said it didn't even dawn on him that was the case for that short story.
Oh, that's a whole.
It didn't dawn on me either. It only dawned on one person. So
that's absolutely what's happening. I mean, so when she goes to her first Jummah, the imam has this khutbah that he's delivering, or this Islamic sermon that he's delivering about extremism.
Mm-hmm.
And so in her story, you see her going from one extreme, which is this very like materialistic, evangelical, like prosperity gospel that she comes from, which is its own kind of extreme, and going to the opposite extreme, which is this ascetic, uber pious, super radical form of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, she's someone that can't see the gray. She can't find her place in the middle. She has to go from one extreme to the other. So hers is a tragic tale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it always felt like the origin story of a villain for me. All villains get an origin story. It's not, they weren't born that way. And that is hers for me. But yeah, thanks for bringing that to the conversation, Ron.
Thank you, Anais.
Any last questions?
I have a question. Aaliyah, I love the book. Thank you so much for this work of art. I'm going to revisit it again and again. It really inspired me. One question I have is that for those of us who are maybe interested in writing or in producing work, what advice do you have for aspiring writers, or tips or resources that you've leveraged in your career?
Thank you for asking me. I think I'm an excellent source of information just because I'm self-taught. So I've had to derive all of these lessons through my own effort. And I think the things that I would tell you might not be the most helpful things to you because I would never want to hurt you or harm you, anybody, you know. But the things that really propelled me were the instances in my writing life where people said the worst things to me. They told me I would never amount to anything as a writer, and I needed to get some tutelage, and if only I'd gotten this degree, then I might have half a chance. And I think it was hearing all of the negative talk and seeing the snide looks, the rolled eyes, like all of that just fed something inside of me that just disbelieved. And so I think the advice really is just to hold on to a kind of healthy arrogance, separate from the humility that you bring to the craft itself. Like the craft should be surrounded by perfect humility. It's in control. It's like the purest kind of religious experience. You really are praying at the altar when it comes to your talent. But with other people, who just love to demolish your dreams, no, there should be a wall. I mean, there are some people like who will have true criticism, and criticism is helpful. But I think it's good to develop a posture of just a strong bravado in the face of the disbelievers, you know. I don't know if that's like straightforward enough.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you're not writing, if whatever you're doing, I feel like that is something that can be applied, that school of thought, right?
But I think the lesson is ultimately you can do it, you know. Toni Morrison doesn't have an MFA. Or James Baldwin did an MFA, you know. It's completely within our powers to learn this craft. And it's not my place or any other gatekeeper's place to tell anybody they can't do it. Of course you can do it, and you can do it excellently.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Bulake, you're back. Do you want to ask your question?
Can I ask a question? I'm on the phone line.
Sure. Who's this?
This is Lila.
Go ahead.
9357. Okay. So I realized on Saturday, I'm in the park with the book club. I realized on Saturday that it wasn't like semi-biographical. I'm not sure if somebody asked this earlier, and I apologize. I just joined on a few minutes ago. But I thought that for some reason, I felt like you were having conversations with all these individuals, and then developing and adapting these stories. But to find out that you kind of created all these stories on your own, I thought that was very creative. And it's unfortunately, I appreciate you sharing your aspect of the whole entire writing situation, because sometimes you have to have the tenacity to continue regardless of all these barriers that are placed in your future. And that was such a great advice to give to other people. But I just found them to be so fascinating and so intriguing to be thought of and written so well. So I do appreciate you sharing this book with us as well. Thank you.
Okay, so you didn't have a question, Lila?
No, it was more of a statement. I apologize. I know.
Does anyone else have any questions? We got like 1 minute left. No?
I just wanted to, is it Layla or Lila? Just thank you for saying that.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I do love your book, Aaliyah. Thank you for writing it. In one of the stories, I forgot the name of it, but there was online dating and stuff in it. I was feeling a sense of queerness between the two friends. Is that accurate? Well, was that intentional for you within the story? Well, when you were writing the story, because one of the friends ended up becoming very like just changing very drastically after the marriage and stuff, and it definitely gave like physical attraction to like envy of the other person for some reason. So
I love that you see that. I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility. If it exists as a possibility in your mind, I think that it's definitely worth seeing it that way. I didn't see it that way. I just think that particularly in Muslim communities, women are very close. Women are very, very close and tactile, and we're sisters to each other. And so we hold each other, we console each other. And from a certain lens, that can look like kind of queer energy is going on, but it's really just a sisterly bond. And so I didn't see these two women as having any kind of sexual tension between them. They're just women that love each other, who are sisters, you know, in that religious sense. And I think like the thing that makes the marriage so hard for Kadira is that she's replaced her own mother with this friend. She sees her friend as a mother, you know, and just like her friend getting married is like losing this adoptive mother. Yeah, so it's more of like a mother relationship than like a queer like relationship. Yeah, to me. But I love the idea that they could be like, she could be like super closeted and not even know it.
Oh, that was a great observation, Bulake. Brilliant stuff. So we've come to the end of our night. Thank y'all so much for coming. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you for people who chimed in with questions. Thanks for participating. This was such a treat. Ron, do you want to close this out?
Yeah, just thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We still have a couple more sessions with the book this Thursday at the Bronx Collab and Saturday at the Bronx River Community Garden. And then next week Thursday, we start Go Tell It on the Mountain. We'll be at Bronx Collab on Thursday, the Bronx Community Garden on Saturday, and then Zoom on Tuesdays. So again, thank you, Aaliyah Bilal, for joining us. This really has been such an informative experience for all the readers. This is one of the things we want to do, is to bring people closer to these narratives that are written for us or about us, or you know, trying to engage us in some way. So I deeply appreciate everything that you've contributed, everything you've written in the book, but also contributed to the narrative of the themes in the book, Ms. Bilal.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and just for the opportunity to connect with so many new readers. You know, it's hard out here to be a writer, and anybody that, you know, pays these books any attention, do you just have a piece of my heart. So thank you so much.
Before we leave, I want to read more beauty onto Ms. Bilal. So she's written this book, no advanced degrees. It's kind of pulled out of the internet, and then she's nominated for a National Book Award. So that the National Book Award, for those who don't know, is like the highest honor you can receive in writing and publishing. So that's amazing. And I know you've gone on, I believe you just received the Aspen Prize and also the Whiting Book Award. So it's really like not based on your talent, but just based on how the system is set up for someone to not have an agent, not to go through all those writing programs that you're supposed to complete, not to have an MFA, and then have your work just nominated for all the and win many awards just adds to the amazement of, what you've accomplished. So I just want to sort of put that crown on your head also.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm so grateful to be in this position because I can evangelize the importance of putting the work first. You know, you can come from humble beginnings. You can come from circumstances where people tell you you can't do it and still do it. And I think it just takes reverence for the work, just a deep, deep love for the work, a dogged determination, being convinced you can do it, knowing that, claiming that, not allowing yourself to indulge in any negative self-talk, saying that you can't, just raising the bar for yourself. This is the open road. Anybody I think that wants to take this road can do it. Can do it, absolutely. This is not just Leah's story, Aaliyah's story. It's all of our stories. We can do this, and so I'm just grateful to be in this position to demonstrate to everybody that you don't have to listen to what these people are telling you, just do something great. It's completely within your power.
Yeah. On that note, again, thank you. Thank you, Brandon, for leading us boldly through the next generation. That's a quote from Star Trek. But again, thanks, Brandon, so much. And thank you all for joining us, for participating continuously. Deeply, deeply appreciated. This would have been a